This conversation with Bonny Lynn was originally recorded in March of 2025. You're listening to Mobile ICER, a podcast from the Institute for Community Engaged Research at UBC's Okanagan campus. I'm Dr. Christine Schreier, linguistic anthropologist and director of the Institute. This podcast has been produced on the ancestral and unceded territory of the Syilx Okanagan people. We recognize that we are visitors on these lands and thank them for sharing their territory with us. One of our podcast series focuses on interviews with speakers who have led discussions on community-engaged research. Today's conversation features guest host Kailee Fawcett, video and podcast editor at ICER, and 2024 ICER Community Engaged Research Student Award recipient Bonny Lynn Donovan.
Thank you so much for your introduction, Christine, and thank you so much for joining us today, Bonny Lynn. It's great to have you on the podcast. All right, and to get us started, I was wondering if you would mind telling us a little bit about what your research topic is.
Sure, I'm happy to. So my research focuses on exploring Indigenous ecocultural literacy with early learners. So predominantly children ages 4 to 5. And how can we, as extended family and even land as teacher, support their development of their ecocultural literacy. And so I partnered with a CEL band school, and children predominantly were CEL, but other Indigenous and non-Indigenous children, attend. And so looking at how we could support their understanding of the local ecology and from their cultural perspective as Indigenous children, and then using a traditional mentor apprenticeship model to support that learning. So engaging middle year students as mentors and the little ones as apprentices, and going out on the land, visiting with the land, and being introduced to different plant relatives predominantly, because it was from April through June. So that time of year, lots of plants are blooming or, growing. And so that's it in a nutshell.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for just kind of giving us that introduction there. And just for reference as well, so Bonny Lynn gave a talk with us at ICER a couple weeks ago, and I just really enjoyed listening, more in depth about your research, and especially, obviously, this role that community plays and kind of shaping your methods and your research questions. And because from what I understand, a lot of your research is very based in the methodology. So I was just kind of wondering if you're able to kind of explain what role the community plays in shaping your research, questions or methods there.
Sure. So I want to preface that even though I'm not CEL, I've spent 30 years of my life working with CEL children and living in a CEL community. And so the community was pivotal in shaping my research questions and my methods, because I wanted to ensure that it was respectful and that it aligned with the CEL worldview. And so I knew that standard formal interviews and focus groups weren't a good fit for this study. And so I needed to look for alternatives. And so community was the primary focus, and making sure that I was being respectful with all of my choices, from the methodology to the methods to how to make the methods of data collection child-centered so that they were able to participate fully and not just be on the sidelines, that they were actually full participants in the project.
Absolutely. Have you in any way had to adapt your research methods to engage more effectively with the community, just given, that you're kind of working with this child-centered approach?
Yeah. So community in the sense that a school community or a community of learners, community of early learners. Yes, so I was fortunate enough to find some adaptations of more well-established methods. So, for example, photo voice is a well-established method that has been successfully used in different participatory action research studies. And so there is a method called the mosaic approach, and that was adapted for use with young children. And so it's using the photographs that the children determine what they're going to take photographs of, and then having group discussions and using the photographs to spark that discussion and spark their memory of that moment. And so that was one that I used. Another one was Maggie Kovach's conversation method. So in place of formal interviews or even semi-formal interviews, the conversation approach, it was less restrictive, could be, more responsive to what was happening in the moment. There was less prescribed sets of interview questions. And then a walking method called go-alongs by King and Woodruff. And so combining them together, where we were having conversations while on the move, just in recognition that, children need to move, we need to move. And then, interestingly enough, research is showing that walking methods elicit different responses from participants than formal sit-down interviews, apparently. And so that was really interesting to me to see if that, was also true for our project. And so those two are examples of adaptations that I was able to find that really helped free the youngest participants, from maybe filling out a survey or writing or a written reflection, because they're just emerging as readers and writers, and I wanted to take that labor off of them. And then I used audio recorders too, so that I could capture conversations between the mentor and apprentices, or audio recorded our large group discussions, so that the conversation was captured and they weren't expected to recall what they said in that moment, because it's often difficult for young children to be able to recall what they said word for word. And so just to take that pressure off of them to try and remember what they said. And so audio recorders also were really beneficial.
I really appreciate just the different approaches and different methods, and just the variety as well, that you've explored throughout your research here. And I really just love your discussion on the go-alongs and the ability to, have movement, and also recording the children, so that way they don't have to remember, what they previously said. It just seems like it's much more, natural and fluid, kind of more of just an evolving conversation with them. And then, it just kind of takes the pressure down, so they're not feeling, I guess, almost like just, that they're the only, like, kind of almost like an interrogation or something. It's much more natural, just conversation, which I really appreciate. And I'm kind of curious, because you're exploring these different methods. How has your research changed your perspective, kind of, on the world or the field, I guess, in general? Or alternatively, like, how do you feel that your research is changing the field, looking at these different approaches?
Well, it's difficult to answer that question right at the moment, just because I haven't written the dissertation yet, so it's not out there in the world. But I can say that I have a much greater appreciation for scholars who make the decision and the commitment to research with young children, because it's not easy. It's not for everyone. And so I really have a greater appreciation of the challenges that come with researching with young children, but also the value and the necessity of it. And so I really appreciate early childhood scholars who are doing that hard work and laying down a path. Yeah, I mean, I'm going to have an opportunity for the first time, actually, to present about my research with different educational research conferences, one in the US and one here in Canada, in the next few weeks. And so who knows what will come of that, but it's the first time that I'll have the opportunity to share it in a much wider, to a wider audience. And yeah, so stay tuned.
Really exciting. Oh my gosh. I'd love to hear more once you get to do that there and just to see how it goes and, what might come out of that. That's awesome. Thank you. And, kind of speaking of that, because you'll be connecting with other researchers, I'm sure, thinking back to when you first initially got started in your research, is there any advice or tips or anything that would have been helpful that you would like to share to researchers who are just getting started on their journey?
Sure. Well, specifically around community-based research, be prepared to be flexible and let go of the ideal that you have in mind because you're not just the only one who is making decisions. And if they are full and equal partners, then they will have decision-making power. And then always communicate early and often, actually, and even keep them apprised of the progress. For example, if you're in the ethics application process, keep them apprised that you're waiting for the ethics reviewer, or that there's some provisos that are required. Just keep them up to date, keep them informed, and also really seriously consider looking for alternative funding to help support the project. For me, it was really important that the CO band operated school that I partnered with didn't incur any additional costs associated with partnering with me. I didn't want it to become a financial burden, and so I really didn't want them to be out of pocket for additional busing costs or even the cost of the cameras and audio recorders. And so I used funding that I had to cover those costs. And so just to be mindful of those things, if you are choosing to do community-based research, that those are some added, things to consider. Yeah, so that's really two things that come to mind is the flexibility, or three, flexibility, communicate early and often, and consider finding some funding to help you, do the research that you want to do so that you're not prohibited by cost and that you maybe have to change your methods because, there's dollars associated with it. And the community, A, maybe doesn't have the finances, or B, you don't have the finances to support that. So yeah, those are three things that I've learned.
That's really insightful. I almost want to make a little infographic of the 3 points, honestly, just because I feel that's so helpful. And I imagine for a lot of people getting started, especially just the comment, on funding and looking for alternative funding would probably be really helpful and just reduce, kind of barriers, to working with those communities and just ensuring that, everyone is getting treated respectfully and not incurring those costs there for sure. Now, I just want to jump back because when we first started the discussion, you just mentioned a little bit about, being on the land with community. And so I was curious because obviously, you're out in the land a lot, with the children and with your research. But what are some of your favorite things to do out on the land when you're with community?
Well, actually, just to be on the land. So taking in all the different sights and sounds that come with each of the seasons and the associations that you have. So, for example, I always associate that dry ponderosa pine needle smell with summer here, and the crustiness, the crunch of the ground covering. And it's my understanding from one of my co-supervisors, Dr. Jeanette Armstrong, that crusty ground covering is a way for the land to make it acts as a barrier, a moisture barrier, because it is so dry here. And just to notice that and understand that that's its function, and yeah, I mean, just to celebrate the different seasons, and then the arrival of the songbirds in the springtime, and looking forward to the hummingbirds returning, and so just celebrating each of the seasons and who comes and who goes depending on the season, and just appreciating that, acknowledging that, noticing that.
I really like that. It was just one thing I noticed when I was leaving my apartment this morning was just, I was like, oh my gosh, the songbirds, they're back, they're out. And it was just so beautiful. And I feel like I just noticed literally every little thing in the environment. There's some dew dripping down from this dead plant that I had last year. And it was just like, but it's so vibrant. So just I really like, just being on the land and just taking that in and all the different aspects. So thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I guess this kind of might go into the next question here. But, obviously when you're doing research, there are, different, really heavy and intense periods of time. How do you take care of your mental health during the intense periods of your research? Is there anything that you find, beneficial that might be helpful for others?
Um, well, I'm not so sure I'm the best person to ask, because for me, every stage of this process has been intense. And yeah, so I mean, someone told me that the study itself was the fun part. And so there were times when I was like, I'm still waiting for the fun to happen. Where's the fun? Only just because, being with the children wasn't the hard part. It was like everything that came with it, like keeping on top of data collection, keeping on top of transcripts, et cetera. So it was all the external details that felt intense, not the actual time spent out on the land with the children. So those were the fun parts. But yeah, I mean, for me, I'm a reader, so I like to do my own personal reading, not the reading I have to do. So I try to find time to include reading material of, that my own personal choice, and not the reading material I feel like I have to read. So for me, that's one way that I make time for myself.
I really like that too, just because carving out the time just for your own personal reading, not just the reading that is like, being prescribed to you or that you have to do for your research. I think it's really important because I think often, as students and getting into research, you just get so focused on doing those readings for your research, where, there's oftentimes, we kind of forget to have moments for enjoyable reading. So I think that's really, really great. Now, is there anything that I haven't asked you yet that you'd like to touch on, or anything in your research that you feel is important to share that you haven't gotten a chance to share yet?
You know what? Actually, when you asked about tips and suggestions, something new researchers might want to consider is finding ways to have the transcripts done by someone else. Just because I was not anticipating how long doing the transcripts myself is taking. So that's another consideration. If there's time constraints and you need to be in the data collection or data analysis phase, at a certain point, then, and you don't have that sort of flexibility to extend your timelines or, extend your program years of your PhD or your master's, that might be something to consider, is paying for a transcriptionist.
That is actually such a valuable piece of information because I did not realize how long it takes to go through transcripts. And I can't even imagine for you because you're going through like so much, like in terms of recordings and all your research, where for myself with ICER, I'm just editing kind of, hour-long videos, and just like going through a transcript for an hour long, I'm like, there's so many little things and you miss so much and you have to keep going back. So I think that is so valuable, just taking the time to pay someone just to reduce that burden on yourself is is probably pretty big there. Wonderful.
Well, there are like pros and cons to it. I mean, one of the pros is that, perhaps you get the transcripts, sooner, but the con is that you haven't spent all those hours listening to the recordings yourself necessarily. And so you haven't sat with the recordings in the same way. And I've sat with them. And so I know them pretty well. And so there are advantages and disadvantages for sure.
Definitely. It's like trying to find like a balance between kind of a bit of both, right? Where yeah, because obviously you want to have the in-depth knowledge and and be able to listen to those recordings, but then also not overburden yourself with too much there for sure. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much, Bonnie Lynn. This has been like such a great conversation. I just really appreciate learning about your research, and I'm really excited for you with these next two, sorry, was it conferences that you said?
Yeah, 2 educational research conferences that I'm going to be doing graduate student research in progress presentations.
Wonderful. That's really great. Now, just kind of my last question, I guess. If people are interested in learning more about your research, is there a way they can do so, or kind of a time when they can check back maybe and learn more?
Well, I guess they could check out the Starting a Conversation recording that ICER did in March. They could do that. Yeah, I mean, other recordings or presentations that I've done have really focused more so like on research that I'm doing in conjunction with a co-supervisor, Dr. Leighton Schnellert. And so like about my research specifically, it's really just now starting to happen. And so it's hard for me to know like what will be available other than the ICER recordings in this podcast for now. I'm not one of those people who have my own website or, I'm not on social media. I don't have my own X account. I don't do any of those things. I'm pretty old school. I mean, people can always email me and contact me that way, I guess.
Maybe what we'll do then, we can do a follow-up podcast in the future, a little down the road and see what's come of your findings there.
Yes, I mean, I would be interested to know what comes of my findings as well.
Oh, that's awesome. I'm so excited for you. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today,
Thank
Bonny
you.
Lynn. I think this is just really, really fascinating. I'm so excited for our viewers to listen to this podcast recording. And we'll post a link for the workshop that you hosted back in March, so that way they can learn a bit more there. And I wish you the best of luck as you're going into this next phase of your research here.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Mobile ICER series, Extending the Conversation, a podcast from the Institute for Community Engaged Research at UBC's Okanagan campus. Produced by Joanne Carey, Christine Schreier, Kailee Fawcett, and Chantel Choga. Today's episode was guest hosted by ICER video and podcast editor Kailee Fawcett. Edited by Chantel Choga. Music by Scott Holmes. Artwork by Madeline Leakeye. Thank you for listening.